A warm welcome from my side to the audience. And I'm pretty excited because we today have a quite global audience. I've seen we have participants from across Europe, but also Africa, Tunisia, Morocco, South Africa, what I've seen. So to all of you, good afternoon. We have several participants from Asia also. So to you, good evening. And also several from the Americas, the US, Brazil, I see here, Peru, I see here. So also to you, good morning then. So today we will be hosting or we'll be doing a webinar on Fabia's strategic resource. And I have with me Ben Strutt from a very, very interesting company, or like also a very, very interesting experience case study about how innovation failure can to be turned into future wins. And maybe with that, I hand over to you, Ben, and can you say some words about yourself?
Thanks, Fabian. Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thanks for joining us. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm Ben, founder of an independent strategy agency, benstrutt.com. I trained originally in industrial design, but I've worked in-house for consumer tech companies like Black & Decker and like Dyson in the early days, first ball vac, first hand vac, first hand dryer. I then spent 13 years in global consulting, partnering with consumer and healthcare businesses from startups through to billion-dollar brands, and delivering at that really exciting intersection, that sweet spot between R&D and insight and design and business strategy. And that work's enabled me to undertake in-home research on 4 continents, work with some incredible teams, and be named contributor on about 25 patents. I set up as an independent strategic growth consultant in 2023, and I've had the privilege of supporting clients in Europe and US since then. So as a strategist, I run a lot of different types of innovation workshop, and one of my current partnerships is with some members of the original team behind a startup called General Magic. More to come on that. We facilitate workshops using an award-winning film documentary about this company and themed coaching modules which help unlock the work and the innovation mindset of teams that are tasked with driving growth in volatile and uncertain times. And I'm here in this photo with one of the film's directors, a guy called Matt Maud, at Boardwave Live, which is a digital software event we supported in London last year. Being film-based, it's a really fun and interactive learning format that uses this extraordinary case study to open up dialogue about a client's own work in context and uncover new opportunities and inspire those commitments to action. So, General Magic. It's those of you who don't know about General Magic, maybe you've never even heard of it. There's a saying in tech circles that General Magic was one of the most important innovation startups in the history of Silicon Valley. That's a pretty big statement. It was a company seeded within Apple Computer in the late 1980s and spun out in 1990 to operate independently, a reflection maybe even then with a much smaller Apple of the concern that the corporate immune system might sort of stifle or hold up progress. But despite some extraordinary achievements in this rapidly changing world, even then, General Magic closed its doors less than 10 years later. I'll be honest, I had worked in innovation for more than 2 decades before I stumbled over the General Magic story. And that stumble was in the form of this movie documentary commissioned by Mike Stern, a former general counsel at General Magic, a so-called magician, to ensure that the legacy of perhaps one of the most important innovation case studies of all time was preserved. As an innovator, when I watched it, it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. When I saw the vision of that team, the work that they were doing at that time, and the world that we now live in, I was blown away by the validity of that bold statement. So what was General Magic? A small team of pioneers who created Magic Link, essentially the world's first smartphone. The movie features interviews with now legendary members of the original Macintosh team, along with future creators of technologies and services that we all have in our pockets today: iPhone, Apple Watch, eBay, Nest Labs, LinkedIn. So although by commercial standards, the business didn't succeed, the learning experience, the team mindset, the culture of innovation, the successes, of course, and critically, the failures, transformed those individuals' ways of working forever. And the technologies they went on, the businesses that they went on to successfully develop, changed the lives of billions of people, ensuring its place as one of the most remarkable case studies of all time. Most poignantly, I believe it's a case study which forces us to reimagine our definition of failure when we're working on far-reaching innovation horizons. And its core message, failure isn't the end, it's just the beginning, is something that I think is deeply empowering to us in our work as innovators as we chase breakthrough. So let's whet your appetite with the movie trailer.
In 1990, there was no digital telecommunications industry. It did not exist. There were no digital cell phones. There was no World Wide Web. We're going to create what comes after the personal computer.
And it was a telephone. It was essentially going to be a smartphone with a lot of intelligence in it.
When we were talking about reinventing telephony, we meant it.
We're trying to make something that people love. We need it to be like your watch, your glasses, your wallet.
We decided to make everything. That meant we were custom building every piece. It's insane.
How small will it finally be? Keep it.
Someday, Dick Tracy wristwatch.
This was the beginning of what became, I think, the most important company that came out of Silicon Valley that nobody's ever heard of.
There was this aura of secrecy. You know, it had Apple's fairy dust sprinkled on it. We had no idea what it was. But by the rumors, it seemed just captivating.
We had no choice but to keep quiet about the things we were doing because other companies were interested in it as well.
Now, it should be noted, John Sculley was running Apple at the time.
He was our ally, also with Hawk.
Today, we are launching Newton, a revolution for the pocket.
They had decided to make something essentially based on our original models.
It's the most important thing that I've ever been involved with in my entire life.
It's bad enough you get betrayed by them, but now they're going to try to put you out of business. That was fighting. That was battle.
I mean, here's a test. What if General Magic never happened? Would we have had Android?
Not a chance. I mean, all these things were linked together, one after another.
So much of what came out of General Magic is the foundation of everything we take for granted today.
And so the question is, can we take these powerful tools and do something that really does help a lot of people?
The reason you should care about the story of General Magic is because it involves something fundamental, and that is failure isn't the end. Failure is actually the beginning.
I would be surprised if anyone who works in innovation hasn't got a pulse that's racing after that film. It's a remarkable story, and I'd encourage everyone to make the time to watch it. It's available on most video on demand platforms. So we're going to come to our first question in a moment. We invite interaction from everyone. Remember, on the Slido, we're going to put up a survey question in a minute. I want you to take a step back to 1989. Let's go down memory lane. Some of us, that might be harder than others. Maybe we didn't even exist then. But the question is, in 1989, what were separate products or services that are now simply accessed through a smartphone? It's kind of hard even to get our heads around, though. It's hard to imagine a world without the smartphone. Right on topic. Feel free to get it out and pop some of your suggestions. Phone, thank you. Yes, a phone. Usually that's one that comes up very late in the conversation, actually. The world was a very different place, of course. The internet barely existed. Phones didn't exist. Digital telecommunications, as we heard. Calculator, yes, absolutely. Camera. Dictionary. Notebook, yeah, travel guide, travel assistance, weather forecast, very nice. I mean, the rucksack's kind of starting to get heavy at this point, isn't it? The amount of hardware that would be in our world. I mean, we could keep going. We could keep going. tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of apps available. And the amount of power in our pocket is simply extraordinary these days. Great. Yeah, strong guys. Love it. Great. Thank you. Okay. So next slide, please, Fabian. So yes, and did anyone have torch on their flashlight for our US guests? The other interesting thing on this photo is we see the young Megan Smith there. We didn't know then, we know now, of course, future White House CTO under Barack Obama's White House, a Google VP, and a then very floppy-haired Tony Fadell, obviously co-inventor of the iPod, iPhone, Nest Labs, and now, of course, Build Collective. So some remarkable careers were founded in this remarkable company. And if we go to the next slide again, in that context, it's also remarkable to reflect on the original sketch. So on the left-hand side of this screen, this was a sketch which was penned by Mark Peratt in his Little Red Sketchbook in the late 1980s of this concept, this vision of smartphone, which he called Pocket Crystal. And on the right-hand side, on the home screen, this was the Magic Cap operating system with things that we can see right now, looks like apps. And yet this was 35 years ago, designed by a young artist, graphic designer, Susan Kare, a pioneer of pixel art. She contributed to the first Apple Macintosh, has gone on to work for Microsoft, IBM, Sony, Facebook, Pinterest, and others. It's remarkable to reflect also that the infrastructure didn't exist then, digital communications, the internet. And yet another incredible feat was not just the visions and the hardware, but this systems environment that needed to be created to enable all of these things to come to life. And one of the team's other remarkable achievements was looking at that big systems problem and bringing together industry leaders, in some cases rivals at the time, Sony, Philips for the hardware, AT&T, and others, to get around the same table and buy into this incredible startup vision of this moonshot future. So what did it look like? Let's reveal the device. And here it is. Branded as a Sony device, this was Magic Link, launched in September 1994 and priced at $1,000. With a size of 40 by 140 by 200, it was hardly pocket sized, but nevertheless, it was pretty remarkable for the time. And for the tech geeks out there, there are some amazing facts. The entire OS ran on a 16 megahertz processor with just 4 megabytes of read-only memory and 2 megabytes of RAM. These stats give a sense of why Andy Hertzfeld and Bill Atkinson and their peers were seen as geniuses. To create this level of functionality with so little power remains extraordinary even by today's standards. So where are they today? Well, just a few weeks ago, next slide, please, Fabian, there was a 35-year reunion. And I'm not, next slide, please, Fabian. I'm not overstating it when I say that this image is a good chunk of the Silicon Valley tech influencers of the last half a century. It's a remarkable photo and a remarkable room full of stories, careers, learnings. But here's the thing, and it's the reason why we're all here today. Even though this happened 35 years ago, this isn't just a cute piece of history. The story of General Magic is as relevant today as it was then. As we heard in the trailer, the late 80s, the early 90s was a time of huge technological and social shift. It was classic VUCA. The steep learning curve experienced by these innovators, the businesses they worked in, it's got a lot of parallels with the world, the time that we're living through now. We're all familiar with that saying that we learn nothing from things that go well and everything when they don't. And this highlights the critical importance of learning from failure, this process of reflecting on what doesn't go well, building on collective learnings, forming new hypotheses, making new connections, helps build probably the most powerful of innovators and entrepreneurs' toolkit, this innovation mindset, this culture, this resilience. And this is an extraordinarily resilient group of people. So let's talk more about resilience. It comes in many forms. It's something businesses and innovation teams are talking about a lot right now. Products, brand, system resilience, process resilience, and of course, mindset, the ability to pick ourselves up after failing, to take a deep breath, move forward, armed with greater understanding, greater wisdom, better prepared to weather the future of uncertainty. But it's not easy. And sometimes it's really painful. It doesn't come naturally. And we'll talk more about why that is in a moment. Most people think of Tony Fadell, next slide please, Fabian, who is the inventor of the iPod, co-founder of Nest Labs, and now working on Build Collective as a serially successful entrepreneur. And this is absolutely true, of course, the second half of his professional career. But in his book, Build, which I would thoroughly recommend, and in the film, he talks about a horrible decade after General Magic folded. In his words, it was failure after failure. And critically, in the movie, he himself actually makes this explicit connection between those two things. Unless he'd learned those hard but important lessons and embraced failure as an inevitable part of the process of chasing breakthrough and chasing new ideas and building that tenacity and that resilience, he thinks it's very unlikely that he would have gone on to realize that later success. And this is really interesting. It prompts us to look at this relationship between failure and success, how we define it, and especially the timelines over which we measure it. We're so used to looking just at the short term. Next slide, please. There's a really powerful moment in the movie, a quote from John Scully, and we saw him in the trailer. He was the CEO brought in by Steve Jobs from PepsiCo to run Apple. And he was interviewed for the movie, then approaching his 80th year. And when he was interviewed with the benefit of a lifetime of new product development and marketing experience, he made this really interesting statement. If you aren't trying and failing, you probably aren't doing anything all that important. Now, it's pretty well documented that Steve and John fell out after a gap opened up in operating ideologies, and that led ultimately both to Steve Jobs leaving Apple in 1985 and Scully's eventually launching an Apple competitor device, Newton, to the competitor General Magic. And, that was down to his frustration with General Magic's failure to launch a Gen 1 product. And it said that Scully and Jobs never were able to make their piece, which is sad. So we're coming up for our next Slido question. It's a big one for you all. The question is, did General Magic fail? And it's a pretty polarizing question to ask. So we've got three options coming up. One is yes, one is no, and the third one is it's not as simple as that. Yes, no, it's not as simple as that. Okay. Interesting. A bit of jostling going on there.
Okay. I'm happy it's not 100%. It's not that simple. So there are also quite some clear opinions here. So yes.
Yeah. And of course it is, very much down to perspectives. What metrics are we measuring is the first question, right? It's difficult to answer. It's certainly difficult to answer without a more detailed exploration. And it depends on so many things. We could consider the question from different perspectives. Would your business, your employer, your leadership consider it a failure? Would shareholders or a VC fund consider it a failure? Would society consider it a failure over a year, a decade, 3 decades, as we have the privilege to look back on now? This case study and this question is posed by Harvard Business School professors in one of their iLab entrepreneurship programs. And of course, in our General Magic workshops. And as you can imagine, it always causes incredible debate. If yes, against what measures was it a failure? If no, why? What measures was it not a failure? And as former magician Tom Hershenson muses in the movie, the company itself, of course, failed, but the ideas didn't fail. The people who worked there didn't fail. So was it a failure? And so influenced by what we know now, of course, 30 years on, about smartphones and the way that these incredible people channeled their ideas and failures and learnings into other technologies, other businesses, prompts us to completely reimagine our definition of experimental failure, how it shows up in the work we do, over what timeline, and how we as innovators and businesses embrace it and foster it, and that culture of continuous learning. So let's carry on with that sort of consensus of the sort of mixed view of whether it sort of failed or didn't fail. And the point is, it's not a straightforward answer. Let's critique this concept of failure. Historically, it's a taboo subject. Our culture, our society is all about winning prizes. You know, we're conditioned from the youngest age that success and failure are two opposite outcomes. One is good, one is bad. Traditional education systems train us for winning. We pass, we fail, we win, we lose, we're right, we're wrong. And so is it any wonder that we feel like we have to hide failures? Is it any wonder that we grow up with an inbuilt risk aversity, which of course can be magnified in certain scenarios like careers, working for businesses that have shareholders and quarterly results, where the ripple effect of failing could be catastrophic, you know, for the brand, for the business, for our job, for our mortgage, for our health insurance. But to succeed in creating things that really matter, we've got to reimagine how, as an innovation cohort, and maybe even as society, we define failure and our relationship with it. You know, given these big long-term challenges that we're facing now, things like AI, things like global decarbonization, we probably have to reimagine the timelines over which we measure the path from failure to success. Is it fair to expect a quick buck if we're aiming at these big transformative futures? So I think this process can sort of start with looking at the language associated with failure within our teams, within our organizations. And we need to probably introduce a new way of looking at it and talking about it. So in my view, bad failure does nothing to move the learning journey forwards. Examples might be planning experiments or prototypes that you know will fail, or maybe they're the wrong resolution. It's too polished when all you need is a minimum viable or a proof of concept. Investing in solutions that don't add value for your customers. Failing to embrace and act on learning opportunities. These are all bad failures. Good failures could be things that enable companies to move forwards armed with greater understanding, you know, aiming for the stars and landing on the moon, understanding what happened, taking that time to apply the learnings, to go bigger, to go faster, to pivot. So we could talk much more about this. Again, we do in the workshops. While it's prudent to avoid mistakes, obviously, it's also important to accept that failures will happen. And the team at General Magic experienced both good and bad failures. It's something we explore, again, as I say, in the workshops. I just want to touch on some of the building blocks that, having established that, to look in more detail at what we call a sort of success triangle. It's a very simplified model for the purpose of discussion now, but it's an interesting way of looking at the formulation for success in a business formulation. So, the first one is team. General Magic had an extraordinary team. They were the best of the best from the tech world, and a team culture in which there was no shame in experimenting and prototyping and failing and repurposing and sharing that learning. It was a really through zero waste innovation mindset. And if our aspiration is anything beyond incremental, if we're reaching for more sustaining or radical or even disruptive innovation, we have to be able to build an organizational culture that builds learning from failure into this psyche. And if that mindset is led from the top of the business, it removes the stigma of taking risks and pushing boundaries, and that in turn fosters a stronger culture of innovation. Is it any wonder that some of the world's most successful businesses fail a lot, and they're happy to do so? They celebrate it, they demand it of their teams, especially those working on Horizon 2, Horizon 3 futures. In an uncertain world, they know they've got to throw a lot of experimental mud at the wall to see what sticks. I came across an article recently, it's called something like 60 of Amazon's failures. The Dash button, Fire Phone, Whole Foods 365. A lot of these individual products failed, but we can see the DNA of many of these experiments in the Amazon products that were ultimately successful. Google X, Moonshot Factory, working on these big long-term projects that could be future businesses for Alphabet, famously reports learnings shared from experimental failures. So really important to focus on, a team, diversity of perspective, and so on. The second thing is they had an extraordinary vision. We live in a very volatile, uncertain world. Those of us working on Future Horizons know we cannot extrapolate the past to a distant future. Maybe there was once a time we could rely confidently on incremental innovation, carrying cash cow brands, but the pace of change now, the pressure on the family purse, the changing aspirations, priorities, I'm not sure that holds true anymore. So we have to find different ways of exploring what could happen, different visionary scenarios. We have to spend time looking at what could come and disrupt our core business, even if our strategy isn't necessarily to be the disruptor ourselves. So what makes for a great vision? Mark Peratt's picture of the future superseded any technologies of the day, the behaviors, the norm, and it's worth listening to the way he pitched it. Telling stories in a really emotive way about future scenarios in the way that he does can be an incredibly powerful and inspirational foresighting tool.
There comes a moment where for some reason you are in the future and you see something very, very clearly. You just see it. That's what happened to me. And I went into the future and I saw the world, which I thought was very real and very tangible. And I stood in that moment inside it and I looked around me. And it was there. It was all there. It was basically the general magic vision. It was going to be so revolutionary that it would take over the world. So this book I wrote in 1989, and this was a compilation of the idea. And it was called Pocket Crystal. And this is what we came up with in 1989. This is a very personal object. It must be beautiful. It must offer the kind of personal satisfaction that a fine piece of jewelry brings. It will have a perceived value even when it is not being used. It should offer the comfort of a touchstone, the tactile satisfaction of a seashell, the enchantment of a crystal. And there it is in 1989. A little while ago, I bought an Apple iPhone 6 Plus. And there it is. We really had it. We definitely had it.
So a beautiful piece of storytelling. And not once did he mention the latest operating system, the latest chipset, the latest technology. And yet 35 years on, we can still recognize that future scenario, that future forecast as the thing that probably many of us have in our pockets and on our desks at this exact moment. So they definitely had an extraordinary vision. So the third part of our sort of simple triangle is execution. And with the full benefit of hindsight, many of General Magic's failings centered on executional failure. And when you see studies listing some of the most common reasons for business failure, they're not alone. This translation of the vision to a mission, to a program, to a project, poor market fit, not knowing the customer, defaulting to poorly evidenced assumptions about who their customers were. And in this photo here, we've actually got a shot of Joe Sixpack, who was the target persona at the time. I'll leave it to you to draw conclusions about how far off the mark they are with this and how much work that poor salesperson needs to do there to sell this concept to them. One of the challenges was they were the best of the best. They gave into their own biases around the customer needs, the customer aspirations. They assumed Joe Sixpack was like them, and they ignored some of the proven methods around program management and product road mapping, and they let their desire for perfection stand in the way of timely shipping of a Gen 1 product. And failing to pivot when the evidence pointed to it. Remember, during this time, the internet went from virtually unknown to a real thing, which was creating all sorts of new opportunities for business models and so on. Now, the downfall of many businesses, large and small, is this inability to both vision and execute with laser focus, something actually Steve Jobs was extraordinarily good at. He was the kind of person that said, here's the launch date, and if it's not in for that date, then it's going in the next product. And this does highlight the need for diverse teams, diversity of skill, breadth of perspective, always questioning those assumptions, the balance, the tension between perform and transform, executing today while moving towards this big long-term vision. And of course, recognizing these tensions is why so many businesses are attracted to tools to help. And that sort of brings me nicely on to connecting with Fabian, who I met about 4 years ago at a conference. And certainly the suite of Itonic's tools has the potential to help innovators through many of these challenges over different time horizons, managing complex projects, big visions, and so on. So maybe I'll hand over to Fabian at this point to talk more about the Itonic's toolkit.
Perfect. Thanks, Ben. And thanks for giving a wrap up about like the general magic story and what can be learned of it. And to everyone in the audience, I can definitely recommend you watching the video. It's like roughly 1.5 hours, I think, Ben. And I think a must watch for every innovator. And what I found really interesting, and also why it's great to have you here, Ben, is because you did something with the general magic failure or like business failure that was there, because you turned basically that failure into a resource from which a lot of people can learn. Yeah, you teach that at Harvard Business School, among others. You run workshops with world-leading companies in the area of innovation. And this is basically what I would say is one of the keys in order for company, or one of the key ideas in order for companies to succeed in innovation, and what we see here. Because let's be honest, the concept of failure and like a failure embracing culture, it has been at least around for the past 10 years. So you saw that in a lot of companies across 2010s that this was promoted quite heavily. But I was always feeling, and also talking to innovation experts and innovation executives across the globe, it's like further manifesting that feeling that I had and that hypothesis that I had is like, oftentimes it gave the impression that failure per se is good. And which I would say it is not. It is good if you turn it into a resource. It is a necessary part of innovation. And companies should acknowledge that when they invest in innovation and have some risk assigned with that, failure will be a part of that. But unless you do something with the failure and turn it into a resource that can inform future decisions, that can inform future execution, unless you manage it as a resource, it's basically just waste, because it does not create any return here. And that's something that we see a lot of times. And I think with what we provide as a software company that helps all the organization increase the transparency in their innovation operations, that help them systematize their innovation operations, and that helps them create a clear data structure for that. And by that, making all the operations, but also the decisions more evidence-based. I think we have some learnings, and what I will do with that is like pick up from where Ben left, and like think or like showcase to you some best practices that we have seen across our clients, also some action recommendations for that, on how you can actively manage failure as a resource, and by that increase the return that you can get from it. So first, there's team. I mean, one of the key things we see with a lot of innovation teams, and from my experience, it gets worse the more new the effort is, the more novel the innovation is that needs to be developed, the more like those teams turn into like oftentimes like silos. They work at the forefront of the market, connections to other teams working on other projects is not so clear. They often lack input from the product lines, which they could benefit from. And all of that oftentimes leads to failure being like confined to the team that makes it. So it's either the team, and there we have kind of a problem that either the teams that have failed in the past, they cannot share what they have and what experiences that they've made, but also like teams working currently on innovation projects are more or less like lost and like cannot get access to failures that were there in the past. And for that, what we see is it is very, very important to implement an innovation feedback loop that is easy to access, and especially that encourages collaboration across global teams. So I would say there's nothing in innovation above water cooler moments. So where you talk to people personally, where you can meet them in person and like see what they got and what they learned from past experiences. But like in international cooperation, that becomes barely impossible. And therefore, one key thing is it needs to be as easy as possible for people to provide feedback on other innovations. Also, what we have is like, or what we see as some of our clients that are doing this quite well, is like the topic of storing failure reports, storing failure case studies. So this is oftentimes happening quite randomly across the company. Some do it, but like it is really helpful that you have clear documentation of what has failed in the past, and especially having an easy automated learning repository, as I call it here, for teams that are working currently on innovation to retrieve it. And I would say today, with today's age of technology and also with the right software, one of those is ours, for instance, it's quite easy to get people working on a specific project directly the information that they need. So automated recommendations about, hey, there has been a project in the past in maybe country XYZ. You may want to learn about what happened there, and can that be informed? Or also, like, apart from automated, having really easy ways for people to search that. For instance, via an agentic AI that helps you retrieve what has been happening in the company at the past and where we could learn from that. And also, like, what we see is also, we have that oftentimes in the form of like fuck up nights, but I think also on a smaller scale in generally encourage and gamifying the sharing of insights from setbacks with leaderboards, badges, incentives. Could be also like about providing feedback from or learning from another project. That is oftentimes very helpful, and that can help teams engage with each other in order to share failures, in order to make sure that learnings from failures are captured. Then second, maybe about the vision. So one thing, and what I really liked is that Ben has put the video in of one of the founders talking about their vision. And what we see there from hindsight, or like from looking into it exposed from today, is that we quite clearly see the vision was quite well, and it is quite close to what products came out then 15 years after the time that General Magic was founded. So, but when we look into organizational realities, then oftentimes we have the situation that there is something. So maybe the organization decides on taking risky projects. They see the project fails, and basically too often everything that goes into that direction is abandoned, and it's like brand marked as this does not work. We cannot work with that. And sometimes there are valid reasons for that, but I think the General Magic story shows quite well that oftentimes it's just about the wrong time. So how can you prevent that? I mean, I have here put here a quote from our Innovation Workshop podcast from Hot Fleischmann, who's partner and vice president at BCGX, basically the digital venturing arm of Boston Consulting Group. And he says it quite nicely. So like nobody has done it. So when we venture into something, we cannot base our strategic decisions afterward just about has the project failed or hasn't it not failed. But what we would need is a systematic process on how to say, okay, this is our vision, this is our picture of the future. This is what we do. And when something fails in that, to reassess, is this important enough towards our vision? And how can we work with that? And it's very important for that. I can give a rundown for that, but key steps in that is, on the one hand, conduct strategic foresight. Strategic foresight is not about predicting the future, but like in mapping the future and creating a plan about the future, and deciding and creating alignment on one specific vision that the company has that matches with what you currently see outside in the market, and that helps you be kind of the North Star for your organization. Then also embrace a portfolio approach, because we know there are different types of innovation projects. If you are working incrementally, it's quite different than if you're working with long-time horizons, more risky things, venturing into new business areas. But what we see in organizations oftentimes is that basically across the portfolio, independent of the time horizons, projects are evaluated quite similarly or quite similar KPIs. But one thing that we would say here is high-risk projects need to be evaluated on other dimensions, and definitely on how do they align to our visions to the future, and what's the strategic learning potential here? What can we learn from this even if it fails? Because this makes it much easier to stay invested, to maybe pivot after a project has failed, and by that make sure that you don't abandon a field that really pays into your vision and that's maybe just not ready but could be ready in 1 or 2 years. In order to make sure that you stay connected to the future fields that you have as an organization. And then third, execution, which is also quite interesting, is like, what can you do in execution in order to turn failures into a strategic resource? One thing that we definitely see is the establishment of structured postmortems, and especially making those available and having a way to track those. So I would say like pre-mortems, anticipating risks. Basically, every company does that when initiating a new project. That's something that we see all the times. When it goes to postmortems, like looking really into detail and really asking why something failed, it gets less frequent and like oftentimes also less thorough, because people have moved on and people want to like leave things behind. And finally, especially if it's like coming to, can I take those postmortems and can I really store them in a systematic way? Can I really make them retrieval? But can I really analyze them in a cross analysis across failed projects? That's quite rare also. So I would first suggest really go into that analysis and create the insights about that, and also store the insights about that. And with that, set up a structured failure dashboard. I mean, working in a job role that has some sales elements to that, basically every sales team has tracking and also a deeper analysis or a dashboard of lost reasons. So why did we not win a specific customer? I have not really seen that in innovation management. So like, why? What's the overview of the failed projects? Why have they failed? What has happened here? Is there a bigger picture? Is there a bigger pattern to that? And this is also a practice that we see from some of our clients that is really helpful in order to see, okay, are we failing always just because of budget? Maybe not. Maybe there was some expertise gap that could have been filled, but it was never reported, and that was the reason for the failure. So having really an overview of what goes wrong in most of your projects is really helpful in order to inform future execution. And especially in an age of AI, this is quite easy to do, because like when you have data collected about that, and it's also oftentimes a failure analysis, qualitative data, but like even quite basic AI, and Itonics provides some more advanced one also, can help you quite easily track down, okay, what was the reason, what did people describe here, what came out of interviews when we looked into failures, and what can we learn from that. And again, Itonics is an end-to-end innovation system that helps you organize, connect innovation efforts from strategy onto execution. And like also by that, create transparency across your innovation operations and give people an easy to access way to collaborate with each other. We would say it's really a helpful tool, especially in enabling the good failure, as Ben has said. For instance, by ensuring systematic learning, collaboration, alignment, ensuring that no insights from past projects get lost, turning the individual setback into collective intelligence, helping people to provide their feedback, but also helping people to easily and quite quickly retrieve data about past failures and let that inform their innovation decisions right now, but also like embedding them failure insights into future decision-making and execution. And with that, I hand back over to you, Ben, and then let's wrap up the session.
Thank you, Fabian. So, Silicon Valley, people have spent years trying to analyze what makes it different from other tech hubs. Is it the processes? Is it the concentration of expertise? I've even heard of a Bayside tour company promoting the sort of entrepreneurial benefits of just being in town and breathing the air. Maybe there is something in the air, who knows? But above all else, I think one of the things that's made Silicon Valley unique is its attitude to the risks associated with transformational work and typically the longer timelines associated with taking these moonshots. There's this really interesting quote in the film from a former magician. "I don't work for a business, I work for the valley." And for me, this above all else highlights the sort of creative culture that looks beyond experimental failings of a single person or company or industry to a higher purpose, this sense of a bigger community and the ability to both imagine and execute game-changing innovation. So before we wrap up, maybe let's hear that quote in context.
So when I saw the pocket crystal, I was taken back to a dream from the 1960s. It's a dream in which we find small magical technologies that will connect us one to another. And through that, we'll be able to build an entirely new kind of society. And I think that's a hope that animates the cell phone today. It certainly was alive in General Magic. Can we make a magical device that will make it possible for us to connect to one another without having to actually touch or even be in the same room? That was the dream that animated much of the 60s, and it's the dream that animated the cell phone. But across a couple of generations of Silicon Valley, we've had companies that maybe in their own terms did not necessarily succeed at the mission that they set out for themselves, but that put together the teams that then migrated out from that firm and seeded the Valley. Someone who worked in the Valley said, look, I don't work for a company, I work for the Valley. And I think that was an incredibly important insight. Companies come and go, they rise up and they fall down. That's the beauty of the Valley. The Valley is a place where you can learn things in one place and bring it to another place. And nobody minds. I mean, that's how it works. That's how you energize and pollinate the system.
Above San Francisco, there's the redwood forest. They drop seeds and then they die. Like, they take a long time to die, but they do. But they create new forests from them. And so that's what it's continuing, things dying and growing. It generally seems tragic, but it's not. It's not tragic in any way, because just because it wasn't the one to take advantage of it and make billionaires of these people, it did create the place where the other ideas could thrive and grow. This idea of people creating companies and them failing does not necessarily mean they're failures. There's places where people come together and then they break apart. Breaking apart is the most important part of it, because then they go off and do their own things.
I love the idea of pollinating the system. So we're living through volatile and uncertain times, and we're at the start of another great period of shift. So I think we have to agree that there is no singular certain future. And if that's the case, it stands to reason that we've got to prepare for different futures, different scenarios. And I think especially so if we're going to tackle a lot of these big, meaningful challenges and opportunities like AI, like global decarbonization, and break boundaries. Some of the work will fail. And I think we also need to be prepared, as General Magic shows, to reimagine the timelines over which we aspire to and measure success. Is it fair as individuals or shareholders or as a society to expect a quick buck if we're really reaching for transformative futures? So just a couple of points to summarize on. Failure really is an option. It should be an unavoidable part of pursuing breakthrough and preparing for different scenarios. Let's all embrace that relationship between experimental failure and learning and success. Let's continuously challenge our assumptions and move quickly and be prepared to adapt, to change, and if necessary, to pivot, because the evidence is telling us that we need to. And I think the final and most powerful thing is let's all focus on building that environment of people and culture and process where we can empower community and mindset and this agile, experimental learning environment. So with that, thank you all so much for listening, and I'll pass it back to Fabian.
Perfect. Thank you, Ben. And I mean, I think like we don't work for the company, we work for the valley. Like same can go to everyone working in their or like in their own innovation ecosystem. You don't work for your specific project. You work for the greater good. And that's kind of the mindset that I think one should have, and like the company altogether should also have when it comes to innovation failure. So Ben, we run a little bit over time, but I think it was well worth it. We had quite some deep dive into the story and also some really nice videos from that. But one question that I have for you right now: do you see another General Magic currently on the horizon? Do you see any startup or anything where you would say, or maybe if that's too specific, like any area where you think that could the next General Magic come from, where we see they are ahead of time. This could be the next story like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, listen, none of us knows what's happening in the insides of organizations, big and small, across the way.
I will not pin you down on your answer. I promise.
I mean, listen, we should be. I'd be super disappointed and surprised if there aren't future General Magics out there. You know, the team of people in their 20s now who are working 70, 80, 100-hour weeks, sleeping under their desk in the office, creating the next big thing. What's extraordinary about technology these days, and AI has come up a number of times, is that actually, traditionally in the past, it's been really big teams that have been achieving these things. And actually now there's been a lot of writing recently about the ability to start potentially billion-dollar valuation businesses with a team of less than 5 people using AI as well. So I think, when I said we're approaching this new extraordinary period of shift, it really forces that question of how are we imagining these futures? Why on earth would we believe that actually the brands that are delivered in the past, the cash cows, the places where we traditionally play, are going to be relevant in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? And I think that's the call to action for every business now, is that transformation, disruption is going to come faster than it's ever come before, and from every direction. And I said it earlier in the conversation that just because we maybe don't strategically intend to be the disruptor doesn't mean we shouldn't be spending time encouraging our teams to spend time looking out and seeing who's going to come and eat our lunch, because it's a relevant thing to do with our time.
And if learning from past failures help you venture into those opportunities even better and they even have a success rate, that's definitely where you need to go. Okay, so thanks Ben. To every one of you, thanks for joining us in this great session. You can visit General Magic here at generalmagicworkshops.com. Can also, I think, Veronica, a colleague from Ben, sent also some links to the video, like to the movie. Have a look; it's definitely worth it. Also, in this session, I refrained from doing some demos into the product or into our software, because like we wanted to focus it more on the general story of General Magic, but like also what you can learn from that. But if you would like to explore how that can be supported in a software, how that could look like, what functionalities could come in there, give us, contact us. Also, if it's more like about some general discussion, hey, what tips do you have for us? Some more general exchange. Both Ben and I are always happy to discuss with innovation experts. With that, I would say keep on innovating and have a great evening, have a great morning, or have a great afternoon.